Hey guys, Akio Murasaki here. This just landed apparently. So Duolingo decided to join a lot of other Western companies in making what I guess they still want to call anime, and this trailer was just released, so let's have a look at it. And I'm gonna give my honest, very unfiltered reaction to this and talk a little bit about Duolingo as such and about Western studios making anime and Japanese studios making animations for the Western market as well. Yeah, we're gonna get into it, but first, the trailer. Okay, so we watched the trailer. I want to first say some positive things because there's definitely some positive things to be said about this whole thing. I think quality-wise, it looks pretty decent. They did definitely put quite a lot of effort into the trailer, and I'm guessing also into the entire animation itself. From what I've read, actually, they did not use AI. These were real voice actors, way better than the cartoon character voices that are available in Duolingo courses. And in general, looks fairly polished. They have some, although I would say super superficial understanding of animation and kind of Japanese anime. Oh my god, but now on to the bad stuff. First of all, this is not really anime. When you look at some of the, I'm just gonna show you some of the details here and kind of this point out what I exactly mean by this is not exactly anime. So let's go here. And stop right here. Okay. So when you look, for instance, at how the character faces are drawn, this is anime inspired, but this is not really anime. You can see the eyes, for instance. Yes, they're large like in anime. Yes, you have the typical anime facial expressions. But again, if you've watched enough anime, if you've read enough manga, you will clearly see that this is not actually anime, but something coming from the West, anime inspired. And also in general, I don't think people should be okay with calling anime-like animation anime. I know I'm being super pedantic here, but it's important to point out that anime is specifically animation in Japan. So cartoons made in Japan are anime, and that's also the core definition of the word anime. So if this was made in the West, it by definition is not anime, it's just a Western cartoon. And this is an ongoing trend that I've seen in the last couple of years, for instance, with the Devil May Cry quote unquote anime, where you see Western studios trying to, instead of, collaborating properly in most cases with Japanese studio and kind of fostering like a good relationship between the two markets, they're trying to, do the typical Western and more specifically American corporate culture thing. They see a successful product, they distill the keywords and key aspects of the products, and they try to copy it. However, unlike China, which is very versed in copying things, the West unfortunately is not, because they take the overall art, they do a pretty decent job at the art, but unfortunately they suck at everything else. So any anime that is made in the West doesn't have the soul, the unrestricted creative force that anime coming from the Japan actually has. And the other thing I want to say about Duolingo specifically here is that just like a lot of people, not just on Reddit, but also in other communities, I do really wish Duolingo would put in as much effort into actually improving the quality of their courses. I will have a separate video because apparently the Japanese course was upgraded recently, so I will be testing that one as well, and also kind of seeing how my Japanese knowledge is over the years, since I've been kind of neglecting it a little bit, I have to admit. So let's see how that works. But in general, if you think of Duolingo as a teaching tool, as a language teaching tool, it's doing a really pretty bad job. So it has been built originally, like a lot of years ago, on a decent foundation of courses created by volunteers. But as a product, what it's doing since then, it's simply monetizing on the existing course material. And also, the way it's kind of being structured is actually not very helpful to learning the language. It's more like presentation. So they've made learning languages into a super commercial product. They overemphasize on the presentation, on the looks, on the delivery, but unfortunately the core content of the courses is incredibly boring, repetitive, and not very good for language learning. To kind of summarize that part a little bit, when you do any of the courses, you will quickly realize that it overemphasizes vocabulary. And at least, for instance, the German course that I did had way too much simple vocabulary that was directly pulled from English. I'm assuming common modern vocabulary, but you're not going to learn much more complex vocabulary you would need at the level that they claim they're covering, for instance. And the other thing is that after a couple of exercises, if you do it every day as they tell you to do, you will realize that the sentences are incredibly simplistic and incredibly repetitive. And eventually you will simply memorize the sentences. And there was at some point a promise that Duolingo would be using AI to improve their content. And they did. But they didn't. But first they locked some of these features behind a new subscription tier. Wow, big surprise. And also, they didn't really improve the core content, which again is not super difficult to improve. You could have had some kind of like manual, sentence randomization with the translations. They never did any of this. They never put in any effort into actually, improving the core content. To be fair, they did some extra features like listening exercises, which are, as far as I know, not available in all courses, but in some of them, you have this kind of radio edition where you practice your listening comprehension. So they did this. But again, the core content, the sentences themselves, mostly unchanged. You have errors and issues that have not been fixed for the last, I guess, 10 years at this point. So yeah, I'm just rambling here. But going back a little bit into animation itself, how the West is trying to take over anime itself, and instead of collaborating to reproduce. This is interesting because in the past, in the 70s, for instance, I had to look this up, by the way. I was not aware. Apparently, in the 70s, there was a Japanese studio called Azel. Sorry, I have to look up the article here a little bit. The one in English here. There it is. Zuyo Enterprise, currently known as Nippon Animation, has made an animation for the German and also then for the Japanese market, of course, but for the German market back then in the 70s, starring Maya the honeybee here. Yeah, the one here in the corner. They made an animation for them. So basically, Japanese studio was contracted to make an animation for the Western market. And a little more recently, we, for instance, have Suicide Squad that was done by Studio Wit, by Wit Studio here, also a Japanese studio. And that was, again, made for the Western market, but was made by a Japanese studio. And when you kind of compare what happens when a Japanese studio is being contracted, is being recruited to make an anime version of like a Western franchise or a Western story, you will notice that even though they might have like a superficial understanding of the series, as is the case with Suicide Squad, they're able to better understand the soul of the product, the soul of the franchise, than a lot of, you know, than in the opposite direction, where Western studios trying to take a Japanese product, a Japanese series, like with Devil May Cry, and adjust it for the Western market. That unfortunately fails horribly because either they inject the product with, current day wink wink hong hong super relatable politics, or they simply butcher it and the product ends up having no soul whatsoever. So, to kind of wrap this up, what I wish would be happening more in the future, specifically about animation, is situations like here with Suicide Squad Isekai, that Japanese studios should be contracted to make animation. If it's for the Western market, that's, kind of also okay. Also, it's going to be released in Japan since it's originally Japanese. But I think this is a better approach, a better collaborative approach than trying to go with the American corporate way of just capturing and taking over and, assimilating something that they don't fundamentally understand. But that's basically my 2 cents on the topic. I don't know what you guys think about the Duolingo anime. I'll leave it to you. Please drop a comment. And I see you guys in the next one. Bye.